Welcome to Investor Web, your one-stop shop for all things related to finance and investments. This is a space where we explore, explain, and make understandable complex financial concepts. Whether you're a seasoned investor or just beginning your journey into the world of finance, we've got your back. Our purpose is to offer insights that can help you make informed decisions. So buckle up as we take a trip into the fascinating world of economics. Today we delve into a fundamental concept, GDP. GDP, or gross domestic product, might sound like a complicated term, but it's actually quite simple. It's a bit like the total score of an economic game played by a country. Now, let's break it down a bit. Imagine you're at a giant supermarket, one that's so vast it has every single product and service produced within a country's borders over a specific time period. Now, if you were to go on a shopping spree and buy every single item in that supermarket, the total amount you'd spend is essentially the GDP of that country. But it's not just about tangible things you can put in a shopping cart. Services too, like haircuts, car repairs, or financial advice, are all part of the GDP. It's a broad measure capturing everything produced within the borders of a country, from the largest skyscraper to a simple loaf of bread. Why is GDP important, you ask? Well, it's like the heartbeat of a country's economy. When GDP is on the rise, the economy is in good shape. Businesses are producing, people are working, consumers are buying. It's a sign of economic health, a green light that signals growth and prosperity. On the other hand, when GDP shrinks, it can be a signal of trouble. It might mean businesses aren't producing as much, or people are out of work, or consumers aren't spending. It's like a red warning light, flashing a signal that the economy might be heading for a downturn. GDP also helps us compare the economic performance of different countries. It's a standardized measure, like a universal language of economics, allowing us to see who's leading the race, who's catching up, and who's falling behind. So in a nutshell, GDP is the economic scorecard of a country. It's a measure of how much a country produces, how healthy its economy is, and how it stacks up against others. It's a number, sure, but it's one that tells a story, the story of a nation's economic journey. Scene script. GDP comprises four main components: consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. Now let's delve deeper into each of these components. First up, we have consumption. This refers to private consumption expenditures, or in simpler terms, consumer spending. It's the money that you and I spend on goods and services. Everything from buying a cup of coffee to purchasing a new car falls under this category. Consumption is the largest component of GDP, making up more than 2/3 of the total in most developed countries. Next is investment. This doesn't mean investments in stocks or bonds, though. It refers to business investments in equipment, software, and buildings. Basically, it's what companies spend to expand their operations or improve productivity. This component can be a little volatile, often swinging with the business cycle. When times are good, businesses invest more, and when the economy slows, they pull back. The third component is government spending. This encompasses all government consumption and investment. It's the money the government spends on everything from maintaining infrastructure to paying salaries of government employees. This component is generally stable because government spending tends not to fluctuate as much as business investment. Last but not least, we have net exports. This represents the difference between what a country exports versus its imports. If a country exports more than it imports, net exports are positive, adding to GDP. If it imports more than it exports, net exports are negative, subtracting from GDP. These four components together make up a country's GDP. They are like the four wheels of a car, each playing a crucial role in driving the economy forward. Understanding these components helps us comprehend how GDP reflects the economic activity of a country. It's like a snapshot of an economy's health, showing us where the money is flowing and how it's being used, and that's why GDP is such an important number for investors and economists alike. Understanding these components helps us comprehend how GDP reflects the economic activity of a country. You may wonder, how does GDP impact me directly? Well, imagine GDP as the heartbeat of an economy. Its rhythm impacting every individual, every business, and every government policy. It's more than just an economic indicator, it's a measure that reflects the health of our economy and, by extension, our own financial well-being. Let's start with the job market. When GDP is growing, the economy is in good shape, businesses are likely doing well, and thus they are more inclined to hire. This leads to more job opportunities and potentially higher wages. It's like a domino effect, with the first tile being GDP growth and the last one being your paycheck. In contrast, a shrinking GDP often signals an economic slowdown or recession. This could lead to businesses cutting costs, which might mean layoffs and fewer job opportunities. It's a ripple effect that can reach as far as your own living room. Next, let's talk about inflation and interest rates. These are influenced by the pace of economic growth, measured by GDP. When GDP growth is strong, demand for goods and services tends to increase, which can drive prices up, leading to inflation. To keep inflation in check, central banks may raise interest rates. On the flip side, when GDP growth is weak, central banks may lower interest rates to stimulate spending and investment. And finally, GDP can impact government policies. Governments use GDP as a guide to decide how much to spend, borrow, and tax. When GDP is growing, governments might spend more on public services or cut taxes, putting more money in your pocket. On the other hand, if GDP is falling, governments may need to tighten their belts, which could mean cuts in public services or higher taxes. So, GDP is like the economic air we breathe. It's always there, influencing our lives in ways we may not even realize. It shapes our job prospects, the interest rates we pay, the taxes we owe, and the public services we rely on. So GDP isn't just a number, it's a measure that impacts our daily lives. While GDP is a useful measure, it does have its limitations. Let's take a moment to delve into these limitations. The first one is that GDP doesn't account for the distribution of wealth. It tells us the value of goods and services produced, but not who benefits from them. If a country's GDP is high, but the wealth is concentrated in the hands of a few, many citizens may still experience poverty. The GDP figure alone doesn't tell us about income inequality or social justice. The second limitation of GDP is that it doesn't factor in the environmental impact of production. For instance, if a country cuts down all its forests to make furniture for export, its GDP might increase. However, the long-term environmental costs, the loss of biodiversity, and the impact on climate change are not reflected in the GDP figure. So a high GDP might not mean sustainable growth. The third limitation is that GDP doesn't account for unpaid work. Think about all the unpaid labor that goes into running a household, caring for children, or volunteering in the community. All these activities contribute to the well-being of a society, but they are not counted in the GDP because no money changes hands. And finally, GDP doesn't measure the overall happiness or well-being of a nation's citizens. A country might have a high GDP, but if its people are unhappy, stressed, or lack access to essential services like healthcare or education, then that high GDP isn't necessarily indicative of a successful society. In essence, GDP is a measure of economic activity, not a measure of societal well-being. It's like judging the health of a person based solely on their weight. Sure, it's one indicator, but it doesn't tell you anything about their overall health, fitness, or happiness. So while GDP provides a snapshot of economic health, it's not the full picture. As we've seen, GDP is a powerful tool in understanding a nation's economy, but it's not without its flaws. It encapsulates the total monetary value of all goods and services produced within a country's borders in a specific time period. It's essentially the economic heartbeat of a nation, giving us a snapshot of its financial health. The four components of GDP, consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports, each play a crucial role in this calculation. Remember, even your morning coffee contributes to the GDP of your country. We've also explored how GDP impacts you directly. It influences the job market, interest rates, and the prices of goods and services. It's safe to say the ebb and flow of GDP touches our lives in more ways than one. But let's not forget, GDP has its limitations too. It doesn't account for the black market, unpaid work, or the quality of life. It's a broad measure, and while it gives us a general idea, it doesn't paint the entire picture. In conclusion, GDP is a vital economic indicator. But like any tool, its effectiveness depends on how it's used and interpreted. Let's continue to demystify these complex economic concepts together. Remember, the more we understand, the better decisions we can make. Thank you for joining us on Investor Web. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more financial insights. Remember, knowledge is the best investment you can make.